Thanks so much. Thank you. So, keeping the word lunch in mind, I'll set my timer for 4 impromptu minutes to, at least, if I can figure out how to use my phone, just so you know, this is all with 5 different essay topics being smashed together. I want to start by thanking the MacDowell for allowing me to be the blockbuster, to use the immigrant metaphors of coming into the world of the tonier arts from the comics slums. And I'd like to thank everybody here, including Allison, for a beautiful toast. Thank you. I know you're here somewhere, but I didn't spot you in the crowd. Thanks so much. Thank you. And definitely to Michael, who's been a great advocate and interpreter of comics, and a person I'm very proud to know and hang with. To Hillary, who is a very acute, not to say cute, collaborator. And I'm grateful that you took this heavy lifting part of the project on. I'd also definitely like to thank Art Spiegelman, who was a fellow here in 2017 and claimed it to be a life-transforming experience, and said, I'm not going to insist that you go because I know you'll hate me if I do that. But if you do go, I'll be proud to be there. And if this was a medal for the co-creation of Naja, I would be very gratefully unambivalent about coming to accept it. But I also am grateful for my real collaborator, the person who owns half this medal and half of everything else that ever happened to me that was worth making and doing, Françoise Mouly, the co-maker of Raw, helped me put breakdowns to bed, my first real kind of cornerstone achievement, if we're going to talk about concrete. For Raw magazine that she dragged me into reluctantly, after I'd sworn never to do another magazine after doing an underground comics magazine called Arcade. For all of the work on Raw, for keeping the New Yorker lively, alive, and worth looking at the cover of every single week. For Toon Books, saying comics, they're not just for grown-ups anymore, doing an about face. Comics for children who need to learn how to read, and comics is great for reluctant readers, also known as boys. And for Resist magazine that Naja and Françoise made just in time for the disaster that all befell us in 2016. And it's with that disaster in mind that I have to give this set of words, which is, it's a terrible time for comics and the best of time for comics. But the best comics are appearing on television these days because one can't keep up with the bad news, fake or not. And you know, if poetry is news that lasts forever, Trump is news that lasts 30 seconds at a time. And a cartoonist can't work fast enough to keep up with the horrible changes that keep coming our way, even if it has a comics character to rival Baby Huey in his monstrous yellow galumphing self. But it's important to try, and TV comics only have to deal with 1 or at the most 2 news cycles per day, have a franchise on it that the slow work of cartooning can't quite have. It's also important to note that one of the reasons it's great to have been the person who was, I got to tell you, I'm ambivalent about everything, including getting this damned award, because I understood that on some level I deserved it. On the other hand, I'm not sure I want the attention. Really, I've had a lot. I figured one more medal could sink me. And what helped convince me was Naja's enthusiasm for, it's like summer camp for grown-ups who are smart. But the other thing that really did help me decide to do this, to become the sacrificial red ribbon who could be cut to allow the horde of comics artists to enter the sacred MacDowell precincts, was when I learned that you didn't have to go, you'd still get the medal. And it kind of gave me permission to come here today, you know? That made it a big difference. Now, comics, what word are we going to use for this? I have no idea. I was very reluctant about the word graphic novel coming in as the kind of phony respectability that can come with the phrase. I remember Neil Gaiman telling me that he was at some large party. Oh, I'm out, can't be. Could that have been 5 minutes? Well, anybody who wants to break for lunch, stampede, okay? Just get out. So Neil Gaiman describes being at this party where he's introduced to one of these Tony people in London as a comic book writer who then walked away, but came rushing back before the evening was over saying, "I didn't know you were a graphic novelist." And his response was, "I went in as a hooker and went out as a lady of the night." So I now see its value. I'm beginning to see things that are made only because the phrase graphic novel has come to exist. Even retrospectively, for people like Franz Masriel and Lind Ward, who I did the complete collection of the introduction for the Library of America's first visual contribution to it, who made these wordless novels. Speaking of wordless, the word I've always proposed for this in past decades has been comics, C-O-M-I-X, to comics, words, and pictures, growing out of the underground comics X at the end of comics, and preferring it because it got to something that didn't require that I be a comic artist coming up with fancy one-liners at my acceptance speech, but involved in co-mixing words and pictures together, which seems pretty basic to this idiom. It's why categories can't work well, and it's something that happened from the Enlightenment on. Before the Enlightenment, everybody looked at stained glass windows to learn the greatest story ever told. But words and pictures got redefined in the end of the 18th century when we needed more literate people rather than just people who tilled the fields. And at that point, words and pictures started becoming treif, unkosher. Can't mix these things together, words and pictures, each for its own domain, sphere, and likely use. Now, in this world where pictures and words both bombard us all day long, it's possible for this to come together again at a moment when Marshall McLuhan said, mass medium, when it's no longer the dominant medium, must become art or die. So I apologize for ambivalently, I apologize for helping to gentrify comics, because there's something that gets lost. I've now met young graphic novelists who go, you know, make way, a graphic novelist is coming through now. It's rock and roll. And that's that shame that came with being a cartoonist that Michael alluded to. It's important to comics, and it's basic to comics. It is an outlaw medium that took over the world when nobody was looking. It is something that acknowledges how dangerous it is to put one's thoughts and feelings on paper, which I know novelists and poets have had the right to do, but here in the bastard children of art and commerce that gave rise to the Sunday outing that became comics, is a very unique form because it's built on a horrible central truth, which is it's built on stereotype and picture writing, a kind of symbolic language. And those symbols are born in the most Jurassic part of our brain. To become a cartoonist meant learning how to draw two women, the Madonna and the whore, maybe the grandmother as well. Learned how to draw, I won't even use all the expletives here just because I won't, even though I'm fearless, but I would say that every ethnic group has had its most vile representations in comics form. And it's interesting that everybody recognizes them. It's built into our language. And it means it's a lot of work to subvert them, but one must subvert them, not suppress them. For as horrible as the horror show of our government these days that may lead to a recap of Mao's 3, that as we live through that moment, it's also important to understand that those pejoratives have to be worked through and not shamed out of existence, to talk to the important and profound changes that we're living through now. And that one, as a cartoonist, has to learn to subvert those cliches. When I made Maus, to call a Jew a mouse because they didn't protest violently in great numbers at their own execution, to conjure up the image of rat that needed to be exterminated, it was part of making Maus, meant rethinking what these stereotypes and cliches might be and using them rather than ignoring them. So I thought that was an important part of what had to happen. But although I know that among the many really admirable winners of the MacDowell Award and residencies here, George Crumb was represented, but R. Crumb wasn't. And inviting him in would invite all of the problems that come with comics into your doorstep. And with that, all I can do is say thanks so much. Thank you all.